Welcome to Afro-Korean love stories. The story opens inside the claustrophobic confines of a diner's storage pantry, thick with the acrid scent of bleach and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Akilah Foster's monotonous night shift is violently interrupted not by a customer, but by the terrifying necessity of survival. The narrative immediately juxtaposes Akilah's servitude, emphasized by her brown service uniform and white apron, against the fallen majesty of Jae-Won Choi. Leaning against a shelf of industrial cleaning supplies, the Korean mob boss is stripped of his usual untouchable aura. His tailored dark suit is ruined by a spreading crimson stain on his shoulder, and his sharp features are tight with pain rather than command. With the heavy crunch of assassin boots just outside the door, Akilah exerts a surprising dominance. With a finger pressed firmly to her lips in a universal command for silence, she overrides the chaotic violence of the night. This introduction establishes the silent pact dynamic and sets up the primary conflict, a powerful man forced to surrender his agency to a woman society ignores, realizing that for the next few minutes, his empire means nothing, only her discretion keeps him alive. 6 months of silence had turned the memory of the wounded stranger into something that felt like a fever dream, but the platinum cufflink heavy in Akilah's pocket was real enough. It was the only thing of value she owned, and tonight, it was the difference between her mother's heart medication and a trip to the emergency room. The neon sign of "Fast Cash Pawn" buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement of the darkened street. Akilah hesitated at the door, her fingers tracing the sharp edges of the metal through the thin fabric of her coat. She didn't want to sell it. The man had told her to wait, but patience didn't pay the pharmacy, and hope was a currency she had run out of weeks ago. Inside, the shop smelled of stale cigarettes, dust, and other people's misfortunes. Akilah approached the high counter, the bulletproof glass separating her from a pawnbroker with grease-stained cuticles and eyes that had stopped showing mercy years ago. She placed the cufflink on the scratched countertop. It gleamed incongruously against the grime, heavy onyx set in platinum, engraved with a stylized, intricate crest of a winged serpent. "I need 300, Akilah said, her voice steady despite the knot of nausea tightening in her stomach. "It's real platinum, I checked." The pawnbroker grunted, not even looking at her face as he screwed a jeweler's loop into his eye. He picked up the piece, turning it over with careless, rough fingers. He paused. The loop lingered on the engraving of the winged serpent. His posture, previously slumped in boredom, stiffened imperceptibly. He tilted the cufflink under the halogen lamp, the light catching the unique, terrifying insignia of the Cheon-sa Syndicate. When he looked up, the dull glaze was gone from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, calculating glint. "Where'd a girl like you get a piece like this?" he asked, his tone too casual, too quiet. "Inheritance," she lied, the practiced falsehood sliding off her tongue. "Just give me the cash. Please. My mother is sick." He stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment, weighing the object in his hand like it was a live grenade. "I can't give you cash right away. I gotta verify the metal density first. It's a unique design. Take a seat." Akilah's instinct screamed at her to grab the cufflink and run back into the rain, but the image of her mother's empty pill bottle kept her feet planted. She nodded tightly and moved to a cracked plastic chair near the window, watching the street. As soon as her back was turned, the pawnbroker didn't reach for a chemical testing kit. He reached for the landline beneath the counter. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed a number he knew by heart but never thought he'd dare to use. He whispered into the receiver, his eyes darting from the girl to the serpent in his hand. He wasn't calling the police, he was calling the wolves. The bell above the door didn't jingle, it rattled, announcing trouble. Akilah froze, the wet rag in her hand dripping gray water onto the checkered tiles. She didn't need to look up to know that the 3 men filling the entryway weren't there for the late-night special. They were the collectors, the bottom feeders who had bought her mother's medical debt for pennies on the dollar and were now demanding blood. Marcus, the leader, stepped forward, his boots leaving muddy streaks on her freshly mopped floor. He smelled of stale beer and cheap cologne, a sharp contrast to the memory of the man she had hidden in the pantry 6 months ago. That man had smelled of copper and expensive bleach, Marcus just smelled like violence. "Time's up, Akilah," Marcus sneered, kicking a stool over. It clattered loudly in the empty silence. "You didn't answer the phone today. I paid what I could last week," she said, her voice trembling but her chin held high. She backed up until her hips hit the service counter. There was nowhere to run. The pantry was behind her, but it held no salvation this time. One of the other men pulled a red jerrycan from behind his back, the sloshing sound heavy and terrifying. "We told you," Marcus continued, watching the color drain from her face. "You don't pay, we scorch the earth. Starting with this dump you call a job." Akilah watched the man unscrew the cap, the fumes of gasoline instantly overpowering the smell of old fryer grease. Panic clawed at her throat, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, heavy stone of resignation. She had worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sold her dignity piece by piece, but it was never enough. The system was designed to crush her, and tonight, it had finally succeeded. She looked around the diner, the peeling wallpaper, the cracked vinyl seats. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing keeping a roof over her mother's head. Now, even this was ending. Marcus stepped into her personal space, raising a hand. Akilah didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She simply closed her eyes, bracing herself for the blow, realizing with a heartbreaking clarity that there was no knight in shining armor coming. There was no secret prince. There was just the smell of gas, the impending pain, and the silence of a world that didn't care if she broke. The blow never came. Instead, the diner was suddenly flooded with a blinding, sterile white light that washed out the sickly yellow of the street lamps. Tires screeched in a coordinated symphony of aggression outside, shaking the plate glass windows in their frames. Marcus froze, his hands still raised, blinking into the sudden glare. The roar of engines cut abruptly, replaced by the synchronized slam of heavy doors, a dozen of them. The diner door was kicked open, not with the sloppy anger of a loan shark, but with military precision. Men in immaculate dark suits poured into the cramped space, moving like water, surrounding the thugs before Marcus could even lower his fist. The air shifted instantly. The smell of gasoline was overtaken by the scent of ozone and expensive leather. Then, the sea of suits parted. Jae-Won stepped through the threshold. He was no longer the bleeding, desperate fugitive clinging to consciousness in her pantry. He was a force of nature restored. His stride was predatory and smooth, his suit tailored to perfection, hugging shoulders that were broad and unyielding. The scar on his cheek was faint, a mere memory of the violence that had almost claimed him, but his eyes were the same, obsidian, intense, and currently burning with a cold, terrifying rage. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus stammered, his bravado crumbling as he realized the difference between a street bully and a king. Jae-Won didn't even look at him. He lifted one finger. The response was immediate. Two of Jae-Won's men moved with blurring speed. There was a sickening crack of bone, a choked gasp, and Marcus was on the floor, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The man with the gas can was swept off his feet and pinned to the linoleum, a silencer pressed to the base of his skull. It wasn't a fight, it was an extermination of a nuisance. The violence was silent, efficient, and absolute. Akilah stood pressed against the counter, her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering a different rhythm now, not of fear, but of shock. Jae-Won stepped over the groaning body of the lone shark as if it were a piece of trash. He stopped inches from her, invading her space just as he had in the closet, but this time, he wasn't seeking shelter. He was offering it. He reached out, his hand warm and steady, and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her trembling face. The cruelty vanished from his eyes, replaced by a possessive intensity that made the room spin. He turned his head slightly, addressing the room without breaking eye contact with her. "Clean this up," he commanded his men, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in her chest. Then, he looked at Akilah, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. "She is with me." The elevator ascended with a speed that made Akilah's ears pop, depositing her not into a hallway, but directly into a world of glass and steel suspended above the clouds. The penthouse was a fortress of silence. Below, the city was a grid of electric veins, but up here, the air was filtered, cool, and smelled faintly of teak and the same expensive cologne Jae-Won wore. Akilah stood in the center of the sprawling living room, clutching the hem of her grease-stained apron, a dirty smudge on a pristine canvas. A team of silent maids had already whisked away her worn coat, attempting to replace it with a silk robe that likely cost more than her mother's life savings. She hadn't put it on. She held it against her chest like a shield, feeling small, dirty, and utterly displaced. "You're shaking," Jae-Won's voice came from the shadows of the mezzanine. He descended the floating staircase, shedding the suit jacket for a black turtleneck that emphasized the sharp lines of his throat. He looked less like a businessman now and more like a sleek, dangerous predator pacing his territory. He poured a glass of amber liquid and held it out to her. "I want to go home," Akilah whispered, ignoring the drink. "My mom is currently being transferred to the VIP wing of St. Mary's," Jae-Won interrupted, his tone even, brooking no argument. "Her debts are paid. The specialists are reviewing her case as we speak." Akilah froze, the blood draining from her face. "How? I never told you where she was. I never told you anything." Jae-Won took a step closer, closing the distance until the heat of his body radiated against hers. He placed the glass on a side table and trapped her gaze, his expression unreadable but intense. "I told you to wait for me, Akilah. Did you think I wasn't watching you while I rebuilt my kingdom?" He reached past her to tap a console on the wall. A smart screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of high-definition surveillance feeds. The alley behind the diner, the bus stop she used every night, the lobby of her mother's hospital. "I saw every shift you worked," he murmured, his voice dropping to a dark, possessive purr. "I saw every meal you skipped. I saw the bruises on your spirit before that lone shark ever threatened to put them on your skin. You watched me suffer." She breathed, horror warring with relief. "For 6 months. You let me drown. I waited until I was strong enough to ensure that once I took you, no one could ever take you back," he replied, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his thumb resting heavily on her pulse. "You aren't a guest here, Akilah. You are the only thing in this city that is truly mine. And I protect what is mine." The gold walls of the room suddenly felt very close, a glittering cage locking tight around her. The elevator doors remained stubbornly shut, the digital panel flashing a red, "Access denied." Akilah slammed her hand against the brushed steel, the frustration boiling over. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater she had demanded be retrieved from her apartment, looking like a glitch in the penthouse's perfect matrix. "Open it," she demanded, spinning around as Jae-Won emerged from his office. "No," he said simply, not breaking stride. He was reading a dossier, his demeanor infuriatingly calm. "The city isn't safe. Kong Dae knows I'm back. He knows I have a weakness now. I am not a weakness, and I am not a prisoner." Akilah shouted, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "I have a life, Jae-Won. I have a job. You can't just buy the diner and shut it down. You can't just erase who I am because you have enemies." She stormed toward him, poking a finger into his chest. "I survived alone for years. I don't need a keeper." Jae-Won caught her wrist. The movement was fast, but his grip wasn't aggressive, it was desperate. He dropped the dossier, the papers scattering across the floor like white feathers. His mask of indifference cracked, revealing a raw, jagged edge beneath. "You think this is about arrogance?" he hissed, his voice rough. "You think I enjoy locking you in here?" He pulled her closer, forcing her to look at the scar on his cheek. "For 10 years, I moved pieces on a board. I was untouchable. Then, the man I trusted like a brother put a bullet in me. The only reason I am breathing is because you put me in a closet and told me to be quiet." He let go of her wrist, running a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. "In that dark room, bleeding out, I realized I had zero control. I was nothing. I swore I would never feel that helpless again." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a terrified vulnerability that terrified her more than his anger. "If you walk out that door, you become a variable I can't control. And if I can't control it, I can't protect it. I can't lose you, Akilah. I won't survive it a second time." Akilah's anger deflated, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. She saw him not as the kingpin, but as the wounded man in the pantry again, terrified of the noise outside the door. She remained standing in the foyer, the silence returning, heavier than before. The crystal ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was a shark tank disguised as a gala. Under the cascade of diamond chandeliers, the city's elite circled, their laughter sharp and brittle like breaking glass. Akilah walked into the room on Jae-Won's arm, wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that cost more than the diner she used to work in, but she felt naked under the collective weight of 100 judgment-filled stares. She could hear the whispers rippling through the crowd, snide remarks about her hair, her skin, the way she didn't quite blend into the monochrome sea of pale faces and stiff tuxedos. Jae-Won felt her stiffen. His hand tightened on the small of her back, a silent promise of violence if anyone dared to cross the line, but Akilah gently pulled away. She needed to breathe. She found a quiet corner near a towering ice sculpture, reaching for a glass of champagne. A woman in emerald silk, the wife of a shipping magnate, drifted over, her smile tight and predatory. "I must say," the woman purred, scanning Akilah from head to toe with undisguised disdain. "It's so progressive of Jae-Won to bring the help to a black tie event. I suppose it's a charitable gesture." Akilah lowered her glass slowly. The old Akilah, the one afraid of eviction notices and manager reprimands, would have looked at the floor. But that Akilah had held a dying warlord in her arms and stared down a gun barrel. "I'm not the help," Akilah said, her voice cool and carrying the steel she had forged in the pantry. She met the woman's gaze head-on. "I'm the reason Jae-Won is alive to sign your husband's contracts. And considering how badly your husband needs the Cheon-sa Syndicate's protection this quarter, I'd suggest you worry less about my pedigree and more about your tone." The woman's mouth fell open, her face flushing a mottled red. She retreated into the crowd without another word. From across the room, Jae-Won caught Akilah's eye. He raised his glass in a subtle salute, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. He saw her not as a damsel, but as a queen claiming her court. But they were not the only ones watching. High above the ballroom, nestled in the shadows of the ventilation ducts, a tiny red light blinked on a fiber optic lens. Miles away, in a room filled with smoke and the hum of servers, Kang-dae watched the feed on a grainy monitor. He traced Akilah's image on the screen, her defiant face frozen in pixels. "She's separated from him," he muttered into his headset. "She's brave. That makes her careless." He leaned back, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Mark the exits. Tonight, the king loses his queen. The safe world ended at the threshold of the VIP lounge. Jae-Won had hesitated, his hand lingering on the small of Akilah's back, his eyes scanning the corridor with paranoid intensity. 5 minutes, he had promised, his voice low. "Stay with the detail. Don't move." He disappeared behind the heavy oak doors to take the urgent call, a call that Akilah now realized was the bait. She stood flanked by 2 stone-faced guards near the elevators, the silk of her gown rustling softly against the plush carpet. The hotel corridor was quiet, bathed in warm, amber light. Then, the service elevator chimed. It wasn't a maid with a cart. A canister rolled out, clattering across the floor, hissing as it spun. Smoke, thick and white, exploded outward. "Down!" the lead guard shouted, shoving Akilah toward the wall. Chaos erupted. Shadows moved through the smoke with terrifying efficiency. There were no gunshots to alert the party inside, only the wet thuds of silencers and the sickening crunch of impact. Warm blood splattered across Akilah's cheek, hot and metallic, a sensory trigger that sent her mind reeling back to the pantry. She scrambled backward, her heels slipping, but a hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her into the haze. She drove her elbow back, connecting with ribs, biting down hard on the leather glove, but a needle pricked her neck. The world tilted on its axis, the amber lights blurring into streaks of fire before fading into black. When Akilah woke, the silence was heavy, broken only by the drip of water. The air was cold and damp, stinging her nose with a familiar, suffocating cocktail of smells, ammonia, rust, and old chemicals. She blinked her eyes open, her head throbbing. She wasn't in the penthouse anymore. She was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of a cavernous, abandoned warehouse. Moonlight filtered through high, broken windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the gloom. The floor was stained concrete, littered with debris and old pallets. Panic clawed at her throat, but it was accompanied by a strange, chilling sense of déjà vu. 6 months ago, she had been the one hiding in the dark, smelling bleach and fear, holding a life in her hands. Now, the script had flipped. She was the one bleeding, a small cut on her temple from the struggle, and she was the one waiting for the door to open. The heavy metal bay door groaned, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the vast space. A silhouette stepped into the light, clapping slowly. "The waitress," a voice echoed, smooth and mocking. Kang-dae stepped forward, his face a twisted mirror of the loyalty he had betrayed. "I've heard so much about the woman who saved the king. Let's see if he's willing to burn his kingdom to get you back." The phone buzzed against the marble floor, vibrating in a pool of blood next to the head of Jae-Won's lead security officer. The corridor outside the VIP lounge was a silent abattoir, the air thick with the smell of spent gunpowder. Jae-Won picked up the device, his hand steady, his knuckles white. "I assume you see my message," Kang Dae's voice crackled through the speaker, smug and dripping with false remorse. "She's alive, for now. If you want her back, I want the shipping routes. I want the waterfront. I want." Jae-Won didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. He crushed the phone in his grip until the screen fractured, severing the connection. He didn't need to hear the demands. He only needed the GPS trace his tech team had locked onto the moment the call connected. He walked out of the hotel, shedding his tuxedo jacket as he moved. He didn't look like a CEO anymore, he looked like the angel of death. Outside, the city seemed to hold its breath. A fleet of black SUVs idled at the curb, engines purring like restrained beasts. His second-in-command waited by the open door, holding a suppressed assault rifle and a Kevlar vest. "Orders, sir. Kill everyone," Jae-Won said, the command devoid of human emotion. "Burn it to the ground. Leave only Kang Dae for me." The drive to the industrial district was a blur of speed and silence. When they arrived at the warehouse, there was no stealth, no tactical maneuvering. The lead SUV simply accelerated, smashing through the chain-link perimeter fence. The warehouse doors exploded inward, blown off their hinges by breaching charges that shook the ground. The night turned into day as flashbangs detonated, followed instantly by the staccato rhythm of suppressed fire. Jae-Won walked through the smoke, a pistol in each hand. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, shooting with mechanical precision. Men rushed him from the catwalks, but they fell before they could aim, dropped by the circle of death Jae-Won's elite guard formed around him. He didn't take cover. He didn't pause. He stepped over the bodies of his enemies, his eyes scanning the gloom, searching for the only thing that mattered. The warehouse was a chaotic symphony of screams and gunfire, but Jae-Won heard nothing but the pounding of his own heart. He wasn't here to retrieve a hostage. He was here to carve a path through hell to get back the woman who had once saved him from it. He reached the heavy steel door of the inner office, kicked it open, and leveled his weapon at the shadows inside. The monster was out of the cage, and he was hungry. Kang Dae laughed, the sound wet and jagged. He pressed the barrel of his pistol hard into Akilah's temple, using her body as a shield against the death standing in the doorway. Jae-Won froze. For the first time, the gun in his hand wavered. He was paralyzed by the very thing he sought to protect, his eyes locking onto Akilah's with a terrified, silent apology. "Drop it," Kang Dae sneered. "Sensing the victory. Or the waitress dies." Akilah felt the tremor in Kang Dae's hand. She looked at Jae-Won and saw the surrender forming in his gaze. He was going to yield. He was going to burn his empire to the ground just to keep her breathing. She wasn't a damsel to be bartered. She was a survivor who had stared down poverty and hopelessness long before she met a mob boss. Akilah shifted her weight, screaming through the gag as she threw her head back with all her strength. Her skull collided with Kang Dae's nose with a sickening crunch. Kang Dae howled, stumbling back a fraction of an inch, his aim disrupted by the blinding pain. That inch was all Jae-Won needed. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Kang Dae collapsed backward, a dark hole in the center of his forehead, his ambition ending on the dirty concrete floor. Jae-Won was on her instantly, a knife flashing to slice the zip ties. He didn't spare a glance for the corpse, he only cared about the bruise forming on her forehead. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his body shaking with the adrenaline of a near loss. "I have you," he whispered hoarsely into her hair, his grip bruising in its intensity. "I have you. We have each other," she corrected, pulling back to look at him. She reached up, wiping a splatter of blood from his cheek, the same spot where she had once signaled him to be quiet. This time, there was no silence between them, only the roar of survival. The penthouse dining room was quiet, but the air had changed. It was no longer a cage, it was a court. The long mahogany table, once a symbol of Jae-Won's solitary power, was now set for two. Akilah sat at the head of the table, her ruined gown replaced by sharp, elegant silk that draped over her like armor. Her hand rested on the polished wood, fingers interlaced with Jae-Won's. The remaining lieutenants of the Cheon-sa Syndicate stood at the perimeter of the room, heads bowed in respect. There were no sneers today. No whispers about her pedigree. They looked at the man who had scorched the earth for her, and the woman who had helped him light the match. Jae-Won poured a glass of dark red wine. He didn't serve himself first. He placed the crystal goblet in front of her, his eyes dark with absolute devotion and a new, terrifying kind of peace. To the queen, he murmured. Akilah raised the glass, her gaze sweeping over the city lights below. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was ruling.